you should be able to share your screen if you have that prepped.
Well, and I was going to do
Yeah.
a short
Oh
introduction,
yeah, yeah, too.
right?
Yeah, sorry, sorry. Go ahead, Kai.
All right. So Vincent, I just want to say welcome. It's so nice to have you here with us. This is especially a treat for me as I've had the opportunity to actually meet and talk in person about some of your research. Vincent went through the Master's in Community Psychology program through Wilfrid Laurier, and uh, today we'll be presenting on the role of care webs in sustaining engagement and well-being among marginalized emerging adults involved in climate justice activism. And so I'm just going to read the high-level description of this. I think it's really compelling. So the description was the settler-caused climate crisis poses severe global threats, driving action from youth and emerging adults. Prior to COVID-19 lockdowns, youth-led climate organizations were highly active, but social distancing has hindered youth engagement and exacerbated psychological distress among marginalized emerging adult climate justice activists. Previous research indicates well-being and social participation are interrelated. Guided by a critical transformative paradigm, this research examines the effects of care webs on the well-being and sustained engagement of marginalized emerging adults in climate justice activism. Care webs informed by disability justice are de-professionalized, non-hierarchical, reciprocal, and anti-oppressive systems of care, all things that I love. Participants were asked to draw their care webs and then participate in one-on-one semi-structured interviews. This research reveals links between well-being and sustained engagement, with care webs acting as moderators with both positive and negative impacts. Findings also highlight the significance of reciprocal relationships for participants' well-being. Contrary to existing literature, participants reported either balanced, caring relationships or receiving more care than they provided. This raises questions to be discussed. The study also seems to show more negative effects of climate justice activism on racialized individuals, raising concerns about white-led, self-proclaimed climate justice organizations remaining rooted in anti-racist influences of environmental justice movements. And lastly, in this study, Vincent offers a critical reflection on his usage of care webs as a theoretical framework. Thank you very, very much, Vincent. I hope I've done a decent intro and welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. It feels weird to hear someone read what I wrote. Sounds really serious, which I'm not generally extremely, I think everything that I talk about is extremely serious, but yeah. I'll just share my screen. Uh, there. Do you see my screen at the moment, which should be only my presentation? Yes. Okay, let me just move things around. So this presentation could take about 15 to 20 minutes. A lot of what I just talked about will be addressed more in depth during the presentation. Also, what I was saying just previously is I don't speak English anymore. Most of my days are all in French. It's been months. So sorry if things are maybe not as fluent as it should be. But don't be shy to ask questions afterward. Um, so yeah, thank you very much for joining me today for this presentation. So my thesis was called "The Role of Care Webs in Sustaining Engagement and Well-being Among Marginalized Emerging Adults Involved in Climate Justice Activism." So this presentation at the moment, I'm standing on the Abenakis land, but also this research project was also led on the indigenous land of the Ganyangehaga, Anishinaabe, and Nayook people. Um, and before I start, I feel it is necessary to acknowledge that the Canadian colonial system is still based on the practice of stealing indigenous people's land to extract its resources. The colonial practice includes supporting imperialist industries to extract fossil fuel, which perpetrates this climate crisis. Um, to emphasize that colonialism and its ideologies, such as extractivism, are responsible for the climate crisis, as I said, I refer in this thesis to settler-caused climate crisis, and I will also use this terminology in this presentation. So, to begin the general context that led me to this research project is my own engagement against this settler-caused climate crisis. This engagement with this issue was also fueled by my own involvement in climate activism. I've been an activist for a long time, and so through this activism, I built a relationship with my now dissolved community partner, which was called La Sève. So this organization doesn't exist anymore. It was dissolved during my thesis, and we could talk about it a little more. It did influence the work that I did. And so at the start of this project, I was in touch with activists from this organization, and they highlighted two different needs that they wanted me to address for this research project. First, the issue that they felt they were having, which was sustained engagement within the organization. And second, they felt like they had a lower well-being, and also their peers had a lower well-being. And then you'll also see in this presentation that I have focus on social justice. Yes, community psychology has a focus on social justice. My own activism brought me to talk about social justice, but also this organization has a specific focus on social justice, which is why I also decided to work with them. And so the issues that they brought up were not unique to this organization. So my literature review at the time that I was working on this thesis showed that these challenges reflect broader social challenges that we are all facing. So my literature demonstrated that sustained engagement has declined in relation to COVID-19 lockdowns, and that well-being, especially for systemically marginalized young climate activists, tends to be lower than the general population due to their own unique vulnerabilities. And so how can we address these specific challenges that we are all facing, and you also doing maybe research on climate justice? How do we address these challenges? Well, before trying to address these challenges, I just want to define a few concepts that I've used in my thesis. So I talked about, and I'll talk about it also later on. So emotional engagement, cognitive engagement, and behavioral engagement. So emotional engagement is a feeling toward a specific institution, for example, your organization that you're engaged with, or toward a topic. So, for example, climate justice. While cognitive engagement is the internal and invisible engagement, such as the thoughts related to an activity, it also includes the values and willingness to invest time in learning your required skills. While behavioral engagement is a more of a visible type of engagement. It is the time, the effort, the interest that someone invests in a specific activity. And here, for my thesis, I also added in behavioral engagement, caring for each other's within a climate justice setting, and not just organizing as itself, which I think care is a form of organizing. And so when we talk about care, how I've defined it for this thesis, so I've built this kind of structure where at the bottom we have the definition of care and all of the other definition adds up on top of it. So I define care as a species of, I use the definition from Toronto, which care is a species of activity that includes everything we do to maintain, continue, and repair a world so that we may live in it as well as possible, which I added in this climate justice activism, because I believe that climate justice activism is a way to repair our world so that we may live in it as well as possible. So care is also a political and a practice relational skill. And from this definition, I was feeling that there was lacking some form of disrupting the status quo, challenging systemic oppression and power structures, that's where I add radical care next to it to complement it. And then on top of it, I added collective care, which is a reciprocal form of care that concerns humans and non-humans. It is also a community-oriented form of care that addresses both individual and collective needs. And mutual aid becomes a praxis to this form of radical collective care, which I will talk about in the following slide. So while I was asking myself those challenges that my community partner were facing, how do I address these challenges? I came across this quote from Dean Spade, which I thought was really compelling. And so Dean Spade wrote that left social movements have two big jobs right now. First, we need to organize to help people survive the devastating conditions unfolding every day. And this, to me, this piece of this quote includes well-being issues. And then Dean Spade adds that second, we need to mobilize hundreds of millions of people for resistance so we can tackle the underlying causes of these crises. And this to me includes the sustained engagement issue. So from this quote, I kept doing research on mutual aid, and I stopped myself on CareWebs, which is CareWebs is a re-theorized framework inspired by mutual aid. It is also informed by disability justice principles. It is, as Kai said, a de-professionalized, non-hierarchical, reciprocal, and anti-oppressive system of care. And I thought that CareWebs was providing a nice visual representation to analyze systems of care, which was really interesting for my methods. And so that's in my methods for this thesis. I developed a method where I first asked 12 participants, the 12 systemically marginalized participants, to complete a pre-interview exercise where they drew their care webs and the needs that was fulfilled by this care web. So here's a drawing of a care web. So in the middle, you have the individual. So X and Y would be the participants itself, and then you have around all the yellow post-its are people that are participating in the care web from this person. So that yellow post-it is one, and then you have the arrows. So the arrows are pointing in the direction of the participants. That's care that is being provided to them. So they would add the arrows and say, for example, 3 arrows means that the person that was the yellow post-it was providing a lot of care, and 2 arrows pointing in the direction of the yellow post-it is them providing care. And so it was kind of a way to picture what was reciprocity, how that care was being exchanged throughout the care web. And then they could add anything that they wanted. So some people added red lines around it just so that they could say that this was a group of people, or this was an organization that was pictured in that care web. So that was it. And there was a lot of content. I'm just stopping here, but I could talk about a really long time what was added in that care web drawing. So then after they did that, I led one-on-one semi-structured interviews with these participants where they discussed their activist journey and thought more specifically about their care web drawing. After I used a comparative qualitative approach for my analysis, which for the care web consisted of a pattern analysis where I analyzed the types of relationship, the themes from the need that was fulfilled by this care web, and the direction of the care, so the arrows I talked about. And then for the interviews, I used a 6-step coding thematic analysis, and then I compared these results. So here is my sample. So the people that joined this study, when they were filling out the form to join it, they had the choice to say that they either had a specific identity, but they were not sure about having it, or that they didn't have it. So for example, for queer identities at the top, there was 10 of my participants that said that they had this identity, while 2 of them were unsure about this identity. While, for example, something that I want to highlight that was extremely interesting in my results is people living with a disability. 5 of them said that they were concerned about this identity, while 4 of them were unsure. So almost half of the people that could identify with a disability were unsure about this status. So for the results, here are my different results I got for this study. So each boxes represent a research question. So the results are separated by research question, and next to the dotted line, you have a quote from my participants that picture some of those results. So for my first research question, which was about the similarities in participants' care web. So everyone included value-driven relationships and activist groups in their care webs. And also, everyone described having relationships that were generally reciprocal or involved receiving slightly more care than receiving slightly more care than they would give. Then my second research question was about their carers' capacity to fulfill needs. So value-driven relationships and activist group appeared to fulfill the most varied needs in my results. Then for my third research question, so on care, the impact of care webs on the well-being. So what showed up is that value-driven relationships seem to present the most direct positive impacts on participants' well-being. While also activist groups also showed that they met many needs that positively affected the well-being. It also showed a more contentious dynamics, as noted in the oppression section on this presentation. But I think it's important to highlight that in my interviews, I asked people if they ever faced oppression in their activist group. So obviously, I have more results about this. So some of the results on oppression is 3 out of 4 of the racialized participants told me that they felt uncomfortable in climate justice spaces, and 3 out of 4 of the racialized participants also felt a lower sense of belonging with their climate justice organization. Finally, the last research question that I've got was about the impacts of engagement on well-being and vice versa. So without going too deep on this slide, we can see that the 3 forms of engagement I talked about, so emotional, behavioral, and cognitive engagement, could both have positive and negative impact on well-being. While also we can see that a lower well-being affected emotional and behavioral engagement. So this last result brings me in what I wrote in my discussion section, which we can see that there's an interrelationship between engagement and well-being. So they both influence one another, and the care web acts as a moderator to this impact. So it can both have a positive or negative impact in this interrelationship, and that but that the care web is not is we can see it here in the drawing as like the care web is one entity, but the care web is complex, and so some spaces in the care web provide more positive impacts, while other spaces can have more negative impacts on the individuals. A discussion piece that I want to dive a little more is about reciprocity. So when I was reading about reciprocity, and so in my literature, I was expecting, well, while reading the literature, what I expected was that systemically marginalized individuals would give more care than they received care. While in my results, what I have showed us is that participants describe having reciprocal relationships or receiving slightly more care than they gave. So that was like, whoa, that's not what was expected. Why is that? And so I started trying to understand this. I built potential explanations, and after that, in my methods, there was a plan of a one-on-one member check. So I presented those potential explanations to my participants that joined this member check, and then we co-created these explanations that I'm going to present to you today. So the first explanation to this gap is that my participants may have consciously adjusted their care webs to achieve reciprocal relationships, as in the past it might have been missing in their life. So maybe in the past they didn't have reciprocal relationship, but now they have more reciprocal relationship. The second explanation is that my sample was maybe not representing the individual described in the literature. And I believe there is some truth to this, as some of my participants might have been more privileged than what was described in the literature. The third explanation to this gap is that the participants may have excluded those who received care without reciprocating it from their care webs, as some of them described to me that they interpreted the care web as mostly providing care to them. So if the person was only if the participant was only giving care to an individual, they might have not included it, or an institution. So some people describe work as being extremely extractivist institution, but they might have not. Some people didn't include work in their care web. So that's more in the way that I framed it, the work of the care web. And finally, I think that the participants might have been doing more care work than they believed they were doing. So this comes from while I was listening to their stories, I heard people that were doing a lot of care work, such as ensuring that intersectionality was included in climate justice movements. They described to me that they were performing additional emotional labor, and also that sometimes they were questioning racial biases from white people and a lot of other examples. But this to me all fits into some form of care work that I defined previously. So this is to say that I just want to stay critical of this gap between what I expected and the final results I put. Another aspect that I want to present here is, needs me to go back to the root of the climate justice movement. So climate justice movement have been significantly influenced by environmental justice movement, which themselves were born in response to white environmental movement that disregarded and imposed harm upon Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities. This historical background on climate justice is significant as when we look at my participants, none of them were Black or Indigenous, which led me to question why is that? I think many answers are possible to try to describe it. And I think that some of them can be seen in the reasons that can be seen in the experience described by some of the racialized individuals, which described to me that climate justice is a white dominant space which impacted their own well-being. And during my member check, the racialized participants also suggested to me that having a less white dominated space or a more culturally diverse space could improve their well-being and sustain engagement. Um, so while I can't be certain, I wonder if Black, Indigenous, and racialized individuals are being systemically pushed out of what I call in my thesis self-proclaimed white dominated climate justice organizations, despite that these movements have been significantly influenced by anti-racist ideologies in response to white environmental movements. And then finally, for my perspective on my usage of care webs, I will again go back to the historical root of care webs. So care webs is first extremely recent. We can see that in my reference, it dates from 2018, and it doesn't date that's the literature that exists. The first person that wrote about it, at least I found, was 2018. And research on this topic is still there's little research on care webs. And then care web is the framework that was developed by queer, Black, Indigenous, and disabled activists that are systemically oppressed by state institutions. And so while I was doing my research, doing my analysis, I wonder if I was the right person to open the space for this framework. And this came while I was working on this topic. So during the research stage on this project, I started to acknowledge that I had little understanding of the deeper concepts of what is care web due to my own lack of lived experience with this framework. So for future researchers, if you're interested in working on care web, I suggest that we critically evaluate the way that I interpreted this concept. And then also, I think that future research should be done by and for disability justice activists, at least for the moment that this framework still blooms. And like, for example, mutual aid, there's tons of research that has been done on this topic. So I think it's a lot safer to try to understand it because you have so much to read about it elsewhere. Um, so to conclude this presentation, it feels like almost an opening, but while I was working on this thesis, I realized that I didn't myself define at first what is climate justice and what is climate justice action. And I want to invite us to reflect on this topic because I think that defining these will say the understanding of the deeper causes of climate crisis and going beyond GHG emissions. Because as these questions might seem abstract, I feel that being able to answer them could have real tangible effects, especially on the well-being and sustained engagement of systemically marginalized climate justice activists. And these questions could also reshape who is heard and who leads the climate justice movements. And what I wrote in my thesis is that if Palestinians that are resisting Israeli occupation, Congolese opposing the genocide linked to resource extraction of their lands to fuel the so-called environmental transition, or mutual aid groups fighting against the impacts of wildfires in their communities, were recognized as central to the fight against the climate crisis, this framing shift could also reshape the narrative of the movement. Thank you very much for listening to me. And yeah, if you have questions, I'm glad to hear them. I'll stop sharing for the moment. I can bring back the sharing afterward if we need it.
Woo woo!
That was great. Okay, I will we decided to stop the recording now, right? Yeah, okay.